A grandmother is a remarkable woman. She is a wonderful combination of warmth, kindness, laughter, and love. Through the portrait of a lady written by Khushwant Singh, we are going to witness such a beautiful bond between a grandmother and a grandson. So, the portrait of a lady by Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh was one of the best known Indian writers of all times. He was born in 1915 in Hadali, now in Pakistan. He was educated at the Government College, Lahore, and at King's College, Cambridge University, and the Inner Temple in London. He practiced law at the Lahore High Court for several years before joining the Indian Ministry of External Affairs in 1947. He began a distinguished career as a journalist with the All India Radio in 1951. Since then, he has been founder editor of Yojna, editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India, chief editor of New Delhi, and editor of the Hindustan Times. His Saturday column, With Malice Towards One and All, in the Hindustan Times is by far one of the most popular columns of the day. Now students, let me give you a brief outline of the story. What is the story about? The Portrait of a Lady is a real story of the writer's grandmother, who happens to be a very old lady. The writer tells us the story of his childhood that he had spent with his grandmother. Now the story. The writer recalls his grandmother as short, healthy, and slightly bent. Her hairs were silver in color and were scattered messily on her wrinkled face. She used to walk around the whole house in white clothes, which the writer defines as she was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. She kept her one hand resting on her waist and the other hand was telling the beads of her rosary. The writer thinks of her as not very pretty but constantly beautiful all the time. He compares her calm face with the winter landscape. During their lengthy stay in the village, means the narrator was staying with the grandmother in the village initially. Grandmother woke him up from the bed in the early morning, plastered his wooden slate, organized his breakfast, and sent him to the school. On their way back to the home, she used to give the stale chapatis to the street dogs. She used to feed the street dogs with stale chapatis. A turning point in their beautiful relationship arrived when they went to live in a city. Now, the writer used to go to the city school on a school bus and studied subjects like English, physics, mathematics, and many more subjects those his grandfather could not understand at all. His grandmother could no longer go to school with him to send him. She felt upset that there was no teaching about God and scriptures at the city school. So the fact that there was no teaching, there was no lesson given on God and scriptures made the grandmother all the more upset. Instead, he was given music lessons, but she said nothing. When the writer went to a university, he got a separate room in his house. The common link of the relationship between the grandson and the grandmother was broken now. Grandmother rarely talked to anyone in the house now. She spent plenty of her time sitting beside her spinning wheel and reciting prayers of God. She started feeding the sparrow birds in the afternoon. When the writer left for abroad for his further studies, his grandmother did not get disturbed at all. Rather, she saw him off at the airport. Seeing her grandmother at this old age, the writer was thinking that it might be his last meeting with his grandmother. But when he came back home, after a duration of 5 years, His grandmother was there to welcome him back, and he saw her celebrate his return. I'm sure by now you could have already related these incidents to your grandmother. The next morning, after the return of his grandson, she got ill. Although the doctor told that it was a slight fever and would go away very soon, still she could foresee that her time to leave this world was near. She did not want to waste her time talking to someone. What did she do? She went to her bed, praying and telling the beads till her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell down from her lifeless hand. To grieve her death, thousands of sparrows flew in and sat dispersed around her body. All the sparrows flew away without making any noise when the dead body of the old lady was carried away for the last rites. Now, students, to sum up, the portrait of a lady summary, the writer and his grandmother had a beautiful bond between them and loved each other a lot. The story tells us how beautiful a relationship can become between a grandson and a grandmother. Now let me give you a brief character portrayal of the grandmother. Khushwant Singh presents his grandmother as a symbol of love, care, and affection. She was a highly religious and conservative lady, but a woman of generosity and nobility. She was like everybody's grandmother, loving her grandson immensely and caring for him with deep love and concern. She had that warmth, she had immense feeling for her grandson, like all grandmothers. She was not physically attractive. She was old, fat, and short, with a stoop, and hobbled about the house with her hand supporting waist, reciting her prayers and telling her beads. In the village, she was actively involved in her grandson's life, but when they shifted to the city, the bond of friendship was broken. Yet, she presented a picture of peace and contentment always. Her love for animals was reflected in the way she fed the dogs and sparrows. She did not like the English school, but never interfered. Now, why do you think she did not like the English school? Because it taught music instead of God and scriptures. She accepted every decision of her grandson regarding his life with a calm and composed manner. She had a great mental stability, and that's why she accepted the separation. Now, the narrator, who happens to be the grandson of the grandmother. Khushwant Singh, the narrator in the story, The Portrait of a Lady, was a sensitive and observant person. He cherished the memories of his association with his grandmother. He has beautifully described the details about many episodes from his past life. His description of his grandmother's old age, her movements, her religious beliefs, her association with sparrows reflect his ability to describe the common things with sensitive delicacy. So the grandson, being the grandson, he also nurtured sensitivity, emotions. He had a kind of emotional attachment with the grandmother because the former years of his life were spent with this beautiful lady, in and out. He was a great author, grandson, and human being. Now let us discuss what are the major themes related to this text. Theme of innocence, friendship, love, connection, kindness, selflessness, respect, and acceptance. The story portrays a grandson's perception of his grandmother, how their bond of love undergoes changes. So initially they were living in the village and they were having a beautiful bond. It witnessed a gradual change when they shifted in the city life. The story gives us a picture of a human relationship with a joint family. Within a joint family, it's a realistic, factual description of how grandparents give the grandchildren all their time, attention, and love. The story also deals with the tension between individual and tradition. The fact that generation gap is not an unsurpassable gulf is characterized by the fact that a move of nostalgia overpowers us when we think of the simple and serene days of our childhood spent with parents and grandparents. So, even if there is a generation gap between us and our grandparents, but still we keep on clinging to the nostalgia. It overpowers us when we think of the bygone days, which were spent with our grandparents. We might grow up and grow apart, but the morals and principles instilled in us by the elder generation refuse to die. So, the fact as we grow up, various tasks and interests attract our attention, leaving us with little time to realize that we might be the only interest of someone in our family. If the birth of a grandchild leading to boundless joy for grandparents is a reality in every nook of the world, it is also true that the grandchildren's attention will invariably be taken over by other things pretty soon. We end up being so busy that those silent steps the old ones take to retreat from our lives are rarely noticed, isn't it, students? Isn't it our responsibility to be with our grandparents when they need us? I leave this I leave this question up to you to answer. Okay? Thank you so much.